I want to thank you all for attending our third event in part 2 of the Inspired by Alona Communal Education Series on Embracing All Differences, with tonight's topic being Cherishing and Protecting Relationships when Families Members are on a Different Path. We are beyond thrilled with the positive response to part 1, which focused on supporting loved ones who identify as LGBTQ+. Tonight's discussion will focus on supporting loved ones who have chosen a different direction from the Jewish observance. We are incredibly fortunate to have such an esteemed panel gathered at tonight's exciting event. Your impressive backgrounds, your enlightened perspectives, and your compassionate orientations will make tonight's discussion a truly enriching experience. I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to honor Alona's memory and legacy by broadening our understanding of topics and issues that affect so many in the Jewish community at large. Thank you, Rabbi Benat Baumach. You are a communal leader and educational entrepreneur in the Haredi community in Israel. You're Rosh Yeshiva for boys in Beitar Elites, and you have established a network of Israeli Haredi schools whose mission is to help students integrate into Israeli society. Rabbi Rothwax heads Congregation Beth Aaron in Teaneck, and is also a licensed clinical social worker, the head rabbi of Camp Morashad, and the director of professional rabbinics at Yeshiva University's Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. Dr. Shoshana Pupko is a mental health professional, Rebbitzin, and educator. Dr. Pupko works at Chief Behavioral Health, is Rebbitzin at Congregation Advent Torah in Inglewood, and is an educator. Dr. Pupko served as Dean of Students at Maya High School. We are beyond thrilled and honored that you are joining us this evening and cannot wait to be enlightened by your scope of knowledge and experiences to help elucidate the topic of embracing family members who have chosen a different direction in their Jewish observance. And thank you, Jeff Cohn, host of the widely listened to podcast from Saturday to Shabbos, for generously agreeing to moderate tonight and for your help in designing the questions. My husband Larry and I would like to extend our most heartfelt gratitude to our amazing committee, Rabbi and Chevy Newton, Rabbi and Sarah Markowitz, Ann Brodsky, Rena Schatz, Rizzy Harris, Irene and Robert Gottesman, Amy Rodman, and Andrew Levine. We are deeply grateful to all of you for dedicating your time, love, passion, and creativity to a venture so dear to our hearts. We continue to be inspired by you and your ideas. We also want to extend heartfelt gratitude to Rabbi and Sarah Markowitz for continuing to support our program. It really means a great deal to us. As many of you have heard and have been to our other programs, Larry and I created Inspired by Alona as a dedication to the memory and inspirational legacy of our beloved Alona Rothman. Alona was diagnosed at 11 months old with spinal muscular atrophy. And Alona was literally the poster child for creating one's own path. We never expected Alona to live to the age of 28 after being told that she had a 5% chance of living to age 2. Alona defied all expectations and lived a joyful, meaningful, vibrant life until she passed on July 4th, 2021. Alona was a force of nature. She attained achievements we never thought possible. But one of the most valuable lessons we learned from our beloved Alona is that every child has so much to teach us. Of course, as parents, it's our job to guide our children, but each of our children deserves respect for their chosen paths. We are entitled to have expectations of who we want our children to be and how we want them to live their lives. We would not be fulfilling our parental duties if we did not give them these guideposts. What we learned from Alona is that each of our children is a divine gift, and it's not their responsibility to adhere to our expectations. It's our responsibility to learn to cherish their essence and accomplishments, even if they don't follow the same path as ours. And again, we are beyond grateful and humbled to have such a distinguished panel with such a broad range of experiences to help elucidate this topic tonight. We're thrilled to proceed and hope that all of you leave feeling comfort with new insights and guidance. Just have a couple of administrative things. The previous two panels can be watched. One was on embracing people who are differently abled and embracing those who identify as LGBTQ. That can be found on inspiredbylaw.com. And we also would ask people if they can just fill out the form at the end, just giving us your name and address, and we're really open to hearing new ideas about future topics. And I just want to let you know at the end, we hope to have time for some questions. And thank you again, all of you, in person and live stream, for coming tonight. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Nancy and Larry, for putting together this wonderful evening. I'm going to start with the easiest possible question, since I'm going to be saying all your names multiple times today, and you all have very impressive titles. If you just share how you'd like to be referred to each time I mention your name. But I'm going to make this easy. Rabbi Rothweiss, I have to call you that because that's the only way I know you see. You will be Rabbi Rothweiss.
I'm going to go with Shoshana.
Okay. I was going to say doctor. She wants to be Shoshana for the record.
As long as it's mentioned once and my parent tuition has been acknowledged, I'm just Shoshana.
Okay. And Rabbi Baumbach? Menachem. Okay, very good. All right, so questions get a little harder from here, but thank you for that. Given what the title is, and that we're going to be talking a lot about how to protect relationships when people choose an alternative path, before we get into that, I wanted to first ask the panel why you think people sometimes choose to go on a different path. What are the reasons behind that? Rabbi Rothweiss, if you want to start first.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It is really an honor to be here. I want to just begin by expressing my personal gratitude to have the opportunity to sit alongside these very two esteemed colleagues who, for some reason, don't want to use their titles this evening. I'm already feeling very isolated. I want to, of course, acknowledge the presence of Rabbi Yudin, Rabbi Markowitz, and the many individuals who are here, my parents. And thank you so much for allowing us to reflect with you and to talk with you about a topic that is so important, that is near and dear to all of us. And whether this is something that we are encountering in our own personal lives, whether we are here to learn how we can be more understanding and supportive of members of our extended family and friends, this is certainly a most important topic, and I think it's a great testament to the Brahmins, to the entire Phelan community, for creating this forum and for allowing us to come together and to grow together this evening. The question that I believe was asked is, if we can identify what would be some of the typical causes, for lack of a better word, as to why somebody would choose a path that is different from the way he or she was raised. And I think it's really important to look at it that way, because the reality is that regardless of someone's personal beliefs or values, I think it's fair to say, and there are others here who may disagree, and I hope they will, that most children, almost by default, will be most comfortable pursuing the life which is similar to the way in which they were raised in their home. So regardless of one's, again, religious affiliation, culture, and nationality, we tend to grow and to develop in a way which is consistent with what we have seen from those around us. And so therefore, whenever a child chooses, particularly at a young age, to select what seems to be a divergent path, it's an important question to ask, why is this happening? Because I think we can all assume, naturally, at least during one's childhood years, there would be a tendency to be similar to one's parents in that regard. Many have pointed out that there seem to be some common features that we can find among those who choose a divergent path. First and foremost, because I think it really needs to be singled out from the outset, is that often, not always, but often, children, adolescents who who depart from religious observance have experienced one or multiple traumas over the course of their childhood, whether directly or indirectly associated with their religious experiences or upbringing. We have all heard, unfortunately, many stories, and I'm sure that we should assume that most, if not all of them, are to a certain extent true. We always like to believe that the world in which our children are raised is one in which they are protected, but the reality is that there have been many, many children who have experienced some very traumatic experiences which have made them seek shelter in places that seem less threatening, less harmful to the ones in which they were raised. I imagine that there could be other children who, perhaps if they didn't experience anything that was necessarily traumatic, may have underlying emotional issues. There may be some distress in their life, and they're seeking to find connection elsewhere. And so therefore, they are just leaving, not necessarily because they are running away from anything, but they are trying to connect with something else. I would say, and maybe this is a surprise to some of you, maybe not, in my experience, which is, it is what it is. I'm not going to say it's the most extensive experience in the world. I think it would be pretty unusual to say that a child or even a teenager would be choosing a divergent religious path for theological reasons. I think sometimes adults, maybe who are real thinkers, who have questions that they feel that they were unable to find satisfying answers, I think it would be unusual that 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old would say, I was really interested in embracing the path of my parents, but I've studied and I've asked all the questions and the answers are simply not satisfying. They may say that, but in my experience, I think that it's probably much more the exception rather than the rule that's really what's driving them away. As you can see already, I have a tendency to talk. So I'm just going to stop myself. Mr. Jeff Cohen, you will throw on the flag at any moment you want to tell me to remember that there are two other very esteemed individuals who are sitting here to my left. So I'll pass it over if there's any.
Okay, so Shoshana, Rabbi Rothblatt mentioned trauma has emotional issues. Do you see other sources or reasons from your experience?
Thank you. So I'm not going to repeat anything that Rabbi Rothblatt shared. I'll just start by thanking everybody who came out, because there's nothing beats being able to do something meaningful in your pajamas. Everybody who's here chose to get dressed and come. So thank you for doing that as well. I know there are a lot of people online, this will get forwarded and forwarded. When I was thinking about this question, so I'm going to try to make things interesting by disagreeing with Rabbi Rothblatt, and then we'll shake things up a little bit. I think in general, young adults, teenagers are always looking to differentiate themselves, and the question becomes, why through their Judaism? Right? Why is it through my Judaism that I'm looking to veer in a different direction as opposed to other areas where every child, even if in general they follow their parents' path, they want to find something unique for them. And I thought about 8 different reasons, 3 of which Rabbi Rothblatt hit on, so we're not going to repeat those. But just to echo the first one that he mentioned, experiences of abuse. So much of our Judaism we learn from other Jews, not necessarily from the Torah. And that's something we really have to keep in mind. When we've had a negative experience of what we would say colloquially Jews who practice Judaism badly, that's a huge turn. And I just want to echo as well that the reasons that I thought about were ones that I see professionally as a therapist, ones that I saw as a teacher for high school students, and ones that I experienced myself as a somewhat rebellious teenager who at times wasn't quite sure what degree of Orthodox living I was going to follow once I was out of my parents' home. And that brings me to reasons 2 and 3. Hypocrisy within the community. I remember as a high school kid, hearing that somebody who was out LGBTQ was not being given an aliyah in shul, and yet somebody who had just come back from spending 6 months in jail for a white-collar crime was given a warm welcome and an aliyah. That kind of hypocrisy can lead to a lot of not just anger and frustration, but theological questions that make us wonder if this is a system we can believe in. Number 3, which is something that I also struggled with, is shallowness in the observance of mitzvot. We look at a system that seems shallow. It makes us wonder, is this something I really want to carry forward? It seems in some respects silly and not something I want to invest time and resources and emotional energy in. For some, it's a system where one size fits all, and I'll leave that one to Ray Wambach because I know he's an expert in that, but certainly for me, it was a system that at times felt like it didn't fit me, and it was a one size fits all kind of system. The last two I'll mention are, for some, it's a gradual shift. It's, I don't really have a strong foundation and pull, and there are things in the outside world that pull at me stronger, and so it's more of a gradual shift. I do very much agree with Rabbi Rothwachs that for a lot of kids, there are other either underlying or parallel struggles emotionally which overlap and play out through anything that seems demanding and unwavering. And Judaism is one of those systems. And so if it's the wrong time, under the wrong circumstances, and there seems to be a lack of flexibility, that can also be explosive for a lot of young adults.
So, thank you.
You have to reverse the order, otherwise we're going to lose.
I just want to apologize about my English. My English is not my native language. I spoke only Yiddish until the age of 20. So, and I grew up in Mea Shearim, so I immigrated to Israel at the age of 20. So I really identify with diaspora. So maybe the majority of you know that I involved in education in Israel. I have many schools that combine secular studies and religious. This is my main mission. I also have a virtual school that combines that we have more than 20,000 boys and girls. And God wanted to give me a lesson of humility. And so he gave me two kids. One of them is in the army and is off the derech. And the second, we have a girl. She's 20 years old and she's not religious at all. So just people say, you said you understand how to create a new system in the Haredi community, but you don't know how to raise your own children, all right? So it's a great lesson of humility. I don't think so. We can mention many reasons why kids choose a different path. But I can mention beside what you said, but we know the Balei Tshuva. Balei Tshuva, there is a very tough issue. I usually speak to the Israeli society, the secular. They are very about the demographic issues. What's going on in Israel? You know, in 2028, 40% of all first graders in Israel will be members of the Haredi community. So the secular community is completely worried what's going to happen. So I said, just for a joke, but I said, I know how to resolve the problem from the demographic issues. Okay, if you have a friend that are engaged before they got married, convince them to become Balei Tshuva if they're secular, right? Why? Because they're going to have 10 kids and 9 of them is going to be secular. So that's the way to resolve the problem. And unfortunately, I live in Beitar Illit. In our city, it was a huge special group for Balei Tshuva, and one day they realized that the community didn't accept them. And they tried all the time to be a part of the community, and they worked very hard to be accepted. But they decided to change their attitude and to just move to North Israel. They opened their own community and they figured out to serve God, you don't need to be a Haredi. It's a new way of thinking, right? But it was very interesting for them. So that's why we think this is a very huge group of kids who become non-Jewish. And another group is immigrants. People are immigrants in a different city. I know that those kids feel sometimes rejected from the community for some reasons. And you know, when you feel you're not belonging to the community, you choose a different path. So I can continue to describe many, but I saw the facilitator, and you want to go ahead, okay.
Okay, so I think the three of you did a really nice job of laying out some of the reasons that someone chooses to go on a different path. And that naturally begs the question, is there something that parents or someone in the person's life could be doing that's addressable before it gets to the point that the person has chosen another path? So maybe Menachem, we can start with you.
I give respect.
You defer, okay.
I'm starting off, okay. So the answer is of course. Of course there are things that we can do, and you know, that's one of the reasons we're here tonight, so we can be thoughtful and proactive and sensible when dealing with children in our community and adults as well, who have made a certain choice. I think for starters, many here may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think about that a lot because it just, it resonates in many different areas in life. But I don't remember if in the hierarchy of needs, Maslow actually identifies a religious affiliation or observance, probably not. But if he would, it would probably appear in the highest tier. When we speak about sort of self-actualization and a person's spiritual fulfillment, and the concept behind that hierarchy, to the best of my recollection, is that in order for a person to achieve fulfillment, in order for a person to be successful, in order for a person to feel connected in some of the higher levels, so the lower, more primary needs have to be met. I think going back to what Rabbi Bambach just said a moment ago, when somebody feels that they're not connected, when somebody feels that they're not wanted, when somebody feels that their acceptance is somehow dependent on something that they do or say, so they are going to feel, on a very, very basic level, they're going to feel not particularly safe. Now, it's true, Maslow's lowest level when he speaks about safety, I think he's talking about physical safety. It goes without saying that that's something that we need to secure as well. But when somebody feels that they really have no place in a family, in a community, in some sort of social setting, it's going to be very difficult for them to go ahead and to reach for something more. And so I think there were many different ideas that were just put out as to where this comes from, and when somebody is choosing a different path in life, what's driving it. But I think it's fair to say that if we want to think about this from the perspective, what can we do to proactively address it, to reduce the frequency of this phenomena, and even for each and every individual. Let's not speak about this in black and white terms, on or off, you're in, you're out. The reality is that there are many, many different points along the spectrum. There are many kids who may be religious or observant, but not quite in the same way as their parents. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're off the derech. And maybe tonight we can talk about whether we want to use that expression. Whatever it is, off the derech. Who's derech? Right? I mean, there are many different drachim. Now, not every derech is necessarily a derech, but if parents really, and if teachers, if members of the group really, really want our kids to find a place that's right for them, we need to let them know from the outset that we value them as individuals, that we recognize that there's a place for them in the community, and hopefully then, with that level of acceptance, of belonging, of connection to the community, they won't necessarily feel the need to go ahead and to reach far out of that circle in order to connect with something else.
I would just add two small points, which are, don't be afraid not to have all the answers. I think a superficial response is far worse than an I don't know. And don't be afraid to have that as a response and to embrace complex questions. People like to say we live in a complex world. I think life has always been complex. I don't know, the history I learned was never really simple. So don't be afraid of those questions. For so many kids, it's a journey. It's not about this question today, and we don't have to hang our hat on that moment, that question, that objection. It's playing along here, which I think is critically important.
I just want to add one thing. It's really interesting when a guy becomes Balshuva, religious, his secular friend is going to say he has a psychological problem. And his Haredi friend, his Orthodox friend is going to say, he figured out the truth, he knows exactly. The opposite is the same. When one of them becomes secular, his friend is going to say, he knows the truth. And the Haredi friend is going to say he has a psychological problem. So we need to be very careful with those definitions.
So as you think about someone getting to the point of choosing a different path, have you found from your experience that it comes as a surprise to the family, or has it been like a building up over time in conversations? Is it one way or the other, or a little bit of both?
I'll start with that one. My experience personally and professionally is that it absolutely varies based on personality. There are some young adults who are, I don't want to say nothing off, but are very verbally expressive. at a young age, things are brewing and they're not shy to share. And there are some who are very quiet and keep things bottled up and to themselves, and then all of a sudden, it's, where did this come from? I think personality plays it's a huge factor in terms of whether or not this is going to be a surprise or whether or not this is not a surprise.
No, go ahead. I'm here to listen, not to speak.
So in addition to what Dr. Cook said, which I absolutely agree with, I think that it's hard to know. You know, hindsight is 20/20, and what happens often when people are frustrated with the paths that members of their family have taken, there's a whole mess of emotions that will sometimes, flood them. They'll be feeling lots of different things. Among them will sometimes be a sense of guilt, maybe personal responsibility, in addition to the shame and the embarrassment and many other emotions. So parents will often ask themselves, what did we do wrong? What could we have done differently? And then they will create within their minds a narrative to sort of understand things retrospectively, which may or may not be true. I believe in many cases it's not true. But when we try to make sense out of a world in which we don't understand, we'll do that to ourselves. It's often unproductive. First of all, it's not going to do anything for the most part to help those parents manage their guilt, unless their narrative wasn't our fault. And I'm not even sure that that's necessarily the right conclusion over here. It's not about assigning fault or blame. It's just to understand and to recognize that each and every individual is going to make decisions over the course of their life. So it's really, really hard to know in individual cases. I think it's really important for us as a community to reflect on this more from a broad perspective and to notice trends, to see if there are certain tendencies, if there are certain groups within our community that seem to be at higher risk, if there seem to be, if we find that in a particular school, let's say, a particular population of students each and every year, seem to be struggling in certain areas, it's incumbent upon us to ask why. Why is that happening? And why does this group seem to be in some ways distinguished and separate from the rest? And let's brainstorm about how we can, keep them connected, as opposed to asking, how is it that this individual, that this young lady, that this young man, decided to go and make a different choice? I think it's very difficult. The only thing is, we should, and maybe I think this is something we'll probably talk about more later. We should ask. How we ask the question, and when we ask the question, and who asks the question. So that's a compliment. We should ask. I've noticed that you've made certain choices. How did you come to that place? Why, etc. So I don't want to take control of this conversation entirely. But in other words, let's not forget we're speaking about people who can represent themselves and speak for themselves. We don't have to analyze them as if they're, specimen in the laboratory. We should ask them. Okay.
Well, I think you are leading us into the next question, which is what's the way to react? Whether you're finding out completely unexpectedly or it's been a process over time, when it becomes real for the family, how you react in that moment seems like it would go a long way to what happens next. So what's the way to take the news when it gets pretty serious?
I think, first of all, you mentioned before that it's so important the parents should not blame themselves. And I always mention the fact that Moshe, he has two sons that he didn't follow his footsteps. And Avraham Avinu has some issues with Ishmael, and Yitzchak with Esau. And there is many Hasidic rabbis who suffer with kids who choose different. It's normal. It's not something that, wow, you have to broke your heart. And I'm just saying it because we sometimes forget. It's mainly in our community, the Haredi community, as a religious and Orthodox community, we are afraid more about the struggle more than observance issues. I mean, mitzvot, tefillin. I once remember one of the parents asked me, okay, he's not putting on tefillin, but he's going to stay with his aunt. So it's a confusion between culture and religious issue. And I think we need to understand it and just, and always people needs help. I think the parents need some psychology to let them, they should not be alone with this issue, because in the beginning, mainly, it's really a tough issue. It's changing, there was a lot of worry, and how it's gonna, what does it mean for the other kids at home, and it's a huge issue.
I think the deeper question to what you're saying is you can be reacting in an angry way, all the way to a loving and supportive way, and there's a whole bunch of emotions in between. And where you choose to land in that first reaction probably sets the stage for what comes next. So I think the deeper question here is, where on that spectrum should you be as this news becomes pretty real for you?
I would add to what was said by both panelists, which is curiosity, a lot of curiosity. And I think that curiosity has to start with curiosity with the self, as the parent, right? What's coming up for me? What am I being triggered by? What do I need to process before I even have a conversation with my child? Right? Owning my own stuff, being curious about, is it peer pressure for me? Am I self-conscious? Do I feel like a failure? Am I confused? Do I not understand? A lot of curiosity. Curiosity can take us far, and then we think we've reached the end of the path, and then it can take us further, and then it happens again and again and again. There's always more to learn, a tremendous amount of curiosity, and I think authenticity. And often authenticity people think means you share everything that you're thinking. Authenticity means that what you share is honest and authentic. It doesn't mean you have to share everything. And I think that's also very, very important for parents to think about, right? There are conversations that don't have to be had with their child. Have those conversations initially with yourself, and then think about what it is that you want to bring to the conversation with your child.
And I think also it's, we know everyone knows about Viktor Frankl, the meaningful principle, and versus Freud, that he speaks about the pleasure principle. I think once we're going to find a meaningful mission for a child, it's going to be very important for him to come back. And I think this is one of the very important things we don't need to focus about religious in this time. Just think what we can make his life much more meaningful. And this is very important because this is what's going to change. He's going to feel connected to me again. So it's not.
And I think related to this, with any decision that a child might make, the parent can choose to accept the decision or try to convince them that they're making the wrong choice. So how helpful or harmful is it as this becomes real, the child wants to go on a different path, for a parent or a guardian or someone to be investing time in trying to convince them otherwise?
Chazal, our rabbis teach us that just as there is a mitzvah to be mochiach, which means to rebuke, to chastise somebody who will listen, they tell us it's a mitzvah to withhold words of tochacha if someone will not listen. It's a very, very strong statement by our rabbis. They didn't just say you don't have to, you're exempt from tochacha, the person won't listen to you. The rabbis tell us it's a mitzvah not to say something if it will not be well received. I think it's fair to say, and there may be exceptions, but I think it's fair to say that when someone is either experimenting with or has, for lack of a better word, made a choice. I mean, choices could always be reversed or reconsidered, but made a choice in the moment to do something, and they're being very transparent about it. It's not being something that they're looking to hide from us. So they're not going to receive our rebuke. They don't want to be lectured, and they don't want to be told as to why it is that what they're doing is wrong. And I think it's fair to say that if they were interested in our opinion, they would ask us. They would ask us. So probably the best approach, as again Dr. Foucault just said, and I love the way she said it, is to really become very, very curious and interested in understanding the experience of this individual. I think the reason why, as parents, we struggle with that is because we are afraid that if we express our acceptance of our child and his or her choices, that we are somehow condoning their decisions. And actually, I'll take this opportunity to make sort of like a little bit of I'll call it a ha'ara, a comment on I think the name of tonight's lecture is unconditional love. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot. We hear about it a lot. I think everybody here has heard it many times. What does unconditional love mean? I'm not sure. I think it means different things for different people. But the reality is that we have an obligation to love the Ribono Shel Olam unconditionally. And actually, I hope I get thrown off the panel for saying this, but we may have an obligation to love the Ribono Shel Olam unconditionally more so than any other person in the world, including our own family members. Where we go wrong often is we think that having an honest conversation with somebody, accepting our children's right to make certain choices somehow implies that we are agreeing with the decisions that they make, that we have to make a choice between loving what I believe in, loving the Torah that so I've invested my entire life and that I believe with every fiber of my being, or you, my child. And that's not a choice that we need to make. Two things can be true at the same time. I often tell people, and I try to remind myself, my children know what's important to me. They've had more than enough time over the course of their lives to experience, to observe, to hear directly, indirectly, explicit, implicit messages. They know how we feel. So it's not really a time to convince them that what they're doing is wrong. Rather, again, to just try to understand what's going on with you. And if they sense, as was said, that we're being authentic, I come in peace. I'm not here to tell you need to stop or do. I'm trying to understand because I want to understand you more. And the decisions that you're making, maybe you'll enlighten me a little bit, who knows? So then the conversation can perhaps be a lot more productive than you must or else, setting the terms, because that's not going to go well. And if it does, it'll only go well in the short term. They'll comply out of a sense of obligation, this need to respect, maybe fear, but not because they're really buying it. It will actually, I really believe this, it will push them farther and farther away. Did I answer the question?
Someone really,
Yes.
Okay.
Shoshana and
I
Menachem.
just want to say we need to remember always that those kids get born not religious. We make them religious, so we need to understand that they continue their choice. But I once was one of the parents in my school that asked me what we can do. I want to share with you a very little story that I was one of the kids in my school that he has many issues, and we decided together with the parents that with the psychology that we need to find him another place. It was really a problem to continue in our school. And one day he called me, he said, I want to meet you. So he came and he said, I want he said, I want to be back. I wish you did. I said, it was so many problems and it was impossible. He said, I promise you can enjoy with me. I'm telling you, let me do this, the last chance of my life. And he finished his school, and I said for all my staff, what do you think? Should I get him back? So everybody says, no, don't do it. It's impossible. And I said, if Yom Kippur is a day that we know we come back again and again each year, and we ask God, you should forgive us. So why we should not give a chance for a child? So I took him back to the school, and he finished as the best graduate in my school. And I'm just telling, not just to say, wow, I'm a great person, just saying that we also need to forgive for those kids, because we're asking God, you should forgive us. So we need to remember always about that. One of the parents asked me, what should I not say? So I write down, I said, don't raise your voice. People are just screaming and all. Don't raise your voice. Don't slander them. Don't insult them. People are insulting us, the kids, and also don't preach them. And don't play on this consciousness of investing you a lot of time, and this is ungratitude what you're doing. Those kinds of conversation is really not touching the heart, and maybe it's also increase their antagonism. So we need to be very careful about that. Just love, and love.
I tell you, I heard many years ago, I heard a story from David Goldwasser, who's a Rebbe in Brooklyn, who's an author, speaker, and he told this incredible story. I don't have too many stories in my head. They come and go very quickly, and I'm not a storyteller. But this is one story that made such an impact on me. He told a story about a member of his shul who is, more than anything else, extremely committed to coming to shul every single day and davening 3 times a day with him. He's one of these people who, no matter what's going on, where he is, where he's traveling, when he's traveling, he'll go from one end of the earth to another for a minute. That's just who he is. That's what makes him tick. And Rabbi Goldwasser observed this over the course of many years, and there was one particular day where there was this terrible snowstorm. Rabbi Goldwasser came to shul late because it was hard to get to shul, and he got there, and there were 3 people there. Most of them were late. And this guy, of course, was there, sitting in the corner with his talis and tefillin, as if he had arrived just as he would any other day. And Rabbi Goldwasser's curiosity got the better of him, and after davening, he went over to this guy, and he says, what's your story? Like, where does this come from? Why are you so passionate about tefillah mitzvah that you'll never ever miss coming to shul to daven the minyan? And he said that when he was growing up, his father used to go to minyan each and every day, and he didn't like going. He said this guy said about himself, he was whatever it is, like many teenagers, he preferred to just sleep in bed. And he saw that it was hurtful to his father. His father wanted him to come along with him, and every single day, his father came in and he said, "Hey, I'm going to shul. You want to come?" And he either ignored his father, or he said, "Leave me alone," or "Don't bother me," or "No." And his father gave him a little kiss on the head, and he left. And he did this every single day for weeks and months, perhaps years. And his father, at some point, left this world. And this son, I don't know how old he was at the time, maybe he was a grown adult, just clicked for him. This was his this was his attempt to preserve this legacy of his father. And he reflected that had my father, given me an ultimatum, or even had he just, had he stopped coming in and just pretended like he didn't notice or he didn't care, he probably would not have connected to Tefillah Tzibor in that way. So you see the way a gentle kiss on the head without, like Rabbi Babak said, without preaching, without teaching, without prodding, without poking, without putting him down and saying how disappointed I am. You should know better. A boy your age, when I was your age, all of these lines, they generally do not work. And if they are, then it means your child is probably, is just experimenting a little bit. And, okay, all he needs is a little encouragement. I just want to say one thing, I'm sorry, and that is, I hope it's obvious. Children need parents to tell them what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And so therefore, we're not here to talk, this is not, how to raise children 101. So I'm assuming it's self-evident, just to say we're talking already about children, young adults, who have already indicated by their actions, by their inactions, by things that they've said, that they're shifting, they're moving away. As opposed to, kids who just, a lot of kids will just, given the option, will just stay home and, I'd rather just watch football. So I said, no, we're going to shul now. I said, okay, I'll come. We don't have to be afraid to tell our kids what's right and what's wrong. We shouldn't be.
I think the question I was thinking about as you were giving your answers, like we would all strive to be patient, showing this unconditional love you talked about, understanding like all these things. It can be very hard in the moment as you're having like an emotional reaction. I'm curious if you manage to be very even-keeled about it, still loving, do you think that increases the probability in any way that over time, the person who's gone on a different path finds their way back to how they were raised? Do you think there's a connection there?
I'll answer that one with a yes and a no. I think my kids know this for me. I'm a redhead, and that's true to my personality through and through. And so I can get passionate and feisty, and then you can make those terms as extreme as you want. But there are many times that I'll respond with more emotion. And I think what's most beneficial is what we like to call in our house the conversation after the conversation, right? You can have moments where you get upset or you get hot under the collar. If you can have a honest, genuine, I'm a big believer that parents need to apologize. Yes, there's a hierarchy. Yes, parents are parents and kids are kids, but there's nothing wrong with parents apologizing. If you can have a good conversation after the conversation, sometimes that can be even more impactful as you own your stuff than what got the better of you in those moments. It kind of go back to the last question just for a split second. I think one of the things we have to be very, very mindful of is switching over the terminology of convincing into dialogue and staying away from a winner and a loser. Because exactly as Rabbi Rothrex just said, when there's a winner and a loser in the conversation, some kids will keep up to be compliant and other kids won't. But we have to stay away from that paradigm, that someone wins in the conversation and somebody loses, somebody's right and somebody's wrong. Those black and white structures rarely, if ever, I'll say never. I'll say never work in that context.
You can see it sometimes as a gift from God. I can share with you my personal story. For 10 or 12 years ago, we traveled to Europe with my whole family, and we stopped next to a swimming pool. My oldest son jumped in the swimming pool, and he started singing. And I didn't recognize, just it was one woman, she said, well, listen, something, and I didn't, I didn't think how much money I have in my pocket, I just give a jump inside, and I saved his life in the last moment. It was terrible. And then I said, my son, listen, it was a terrible experience, but now I know exactly what is meant to be a parent. I never knew before. It's so powerful. And I think to have those kinds of relationships with kids and all what we're speaking here, I think it gives us a huge benefit to be a parent, a real parent, not a parent with great conditions, with different conditions. And I think if you look at it like as a present, as a gift, it gives us a lot of koach to continue to be a parent.
Okay, so I want to go in now to a different area related to this topic, which is, let's say you've gotten to the point where this family member is pretty clear that they're going in a different direction, and the family has gotten to the point that they've accepted it. So now you have the vast majority of the family is observant, you have one person who's gone in a different direction. How do you see that affect the dynamic of the family at that point?
I think it's also a gift. Again, I think that the family sees that no one and no time and no way is going to be rejected because of his choices, it gives a lot of stability and confidence for each of them. And just thinking about the child is sitting alone and see the parents reject their kids or screaming at their kids, that gives them a feeling, my life is not safe. And this is what's going to bring him to change maybe in the future. So acceptance I think, needs to be the rule number one. Acceptance, really, not to apologize. No, this is our home. Our home is for our kids, and there will always be this home, even people have different choices. And it's such a strong message for the kids.
I think related to that is if, let's say the oldest child is the one who goes in a different direction, you have younger kids who are watching how the parents are reacting and what the life now is of the person who's gone in a different direction. So if you're the parent, you're thinking, it's not just dealing with this person who's gone a different path. How I react is sending a pretty strong message to the younger kids, and how do I want to handle it? And do I want to act like I'm condoning what this child is doing or show acceptance?
So I give you before, now you have to give me back. I want to say just this story. Rabbi Steinman was very famous, huge rabbi in Israel. He passed away 3 years ago. He passed away in the age of 104, and he was really smart and clever and awesome. So one of his followers asked him. He said, "We have 10 kids, and my daughter, she's now secular. What should I do?" So he said, "Take out the whole 9 kids and live here alone." That's what he said. I mean, sometimes people think she needs your love more than anybody else. And I don't know what's the end of the story, but what is sure is that people trust the kids. If you give trust, now in the new world, we are speaking very much about trust. And we use the phrase, trust is the new currency. And we can see a collaboration between success countries that they have trust and the countries who have the citizens has not too much trust. So you can see the economic system is parallel to the trust. And I think also a home that there is a lot of trust. I trust you. I know you will do different choices, but I trust you. You will do the right things. I think you make the past much more shorter. you up them very much.
I think that for parents to watch one of their children act in a way that does not conform with that which has been until this point considered to be acceptable in this home is very frightening. It's a very difficult challenge for parents to see. Because there is this belief that we have that whatever's happening here is contagious. And we just don't want it to spread. And if we're going to accept this child, if we're going to create and invite him or her to come to, have a seat at the table, so to speak, literally and figuratively. So we're really telling our kids, this is okay. No matter what you do, we're going to love you, and we're going to approve of your choices, etc. But as I said earlier, I don't believe that's, I really don't believe it's true. I don't see any evidence for it. But Yaakov Horowitz was a real, he's a champion in this area, and has really led this conversation on a global level. He's told me personally that he's never seen this in his experience, that when accepting a child and embracing a child and keeping the child close, that will have a negative influence on the other members of the household. There may be some technical issues that need to be discussed. I think it's fair to say that, I'll use this as an example. There are many homes in which, even if smoking is something which is allowed outside of the home, inside the home, it's not just, it's harmful to other people, so it's just not respectful. The concept of secondhand smoke. So you want to smoke, go outside of the backyard. It's not that we're rejecting you, it's just that, we don't want to breathe in your smoke, so take it elsewhere. If we can take that concept and sort of apply it here, it stands to reason, in my experience, whatever it's worth. I think that most kids will be compliant. They're not going to be looking to be Mechal Shabbos at the Shabbos table, but to go ahead and to follow them up to the bedroom and to make sure, we'll take what we can get. And if we want you to be part of this family. I just want to, again, just repeat a point that was made earlier. Just be real, just be genuine, be authentic. Your kids will smell it a mile away if it's not sincere, if there's a discomfort. If I have a child, and actually I do have a child, who does not necessarily dress like her sisters or like many other, women, young women in the shul, and I'm going to, going to seem and act as if I'm somewhat uncomfortable around her. I want to somehow disassociate from her in public. She will sense that. She will realize that, and she'll no matter what I say, she'll know what I'm saying, and that is that I'm embarrassed by you. I don't. And if I can overcome my own insecurities and really hold her close and keep her close and hold her hand and keep her close to me, and as if I'm completely proud to be this young woman's father, she's also processing all that. She's thinking about that, and she's going to say to herself, well, maybe there's a way I can figure this out. Because if this person who's a rabbi and he preaches and teaches and studies Torah can somehow still find it's not beneath him in any way. There's no dissonance there that he was told. So then there's got to be a way to figure this out, right?
I think also when we see families where there are two siblings who have chosen a different path, we very quickly confuse correlation with causation, right? Yes, there's a correlation. There are two siblings who've chosen a different path. That doesn't necessarily mean that one sibling then caused the other to follow the same path. Perhaps they open the door for the second sibling to be more open or to be braver about expressing what they were expressing. But there's a book written a number of years ago by Farah Margulies. She's a former LAer. And she interviewed, I think it was thousands, don't quote me on that, but it was a large number of people who chose a different path. And she, came up with 400 pages. Not one of them said, my older sibling chose a different path, so I did too. Didn't appear anywhere in the book. And I found that fascinating. I remember reading the book. Doesn't appear. And so, the concept of contagious, right, which is something we do fear, it's just not supported. It's just simply not supported, even though emotionally it feels very, very real. And I think we have to acknowledge how real it feels and validate how real it feels, but it's just simply not supported. So let's keep going.
So absolutely, the home is a solution, not a problem. And we know Aaron Akoyan, he said, first of all, הוא אז מקרב, מקרבן הבריות, אחרי זה, you know that. So before you want to influence the spirituality, you have to be mekar of them. You have to make them closer to you. This is exactly what Aaron Akoyan made. So the home is absolutely the solution of the problem.
To give my parents credit for, again, for the tuition they spent on my doctorate, is actually what I studied was high school kids and their relationship with God, what we call relatedness to God. Why are there high school kids who buy in to this amorphous concept of God, and there are high school kids who don't? And I studied 10, I think 12 different variables, and I'm very frustrated by the end of my research because none of them panned out to be statistically significant. And it was, how am I going to twist this to kind of come to a conclusion that's going to pass muster in this paper? And then my statistician, God bless her soul, who was actually somebody who was raised Orthodox and took a different path, said, let's look at some things that you didn't think to look at. And what we found was one variable, which was not only statistically significant, but it ranked quite high. And that variable was family cohesion. And we started to pick apart family cohesion, which means that every kid in the family has a place. They're broader than one factor. This kid's not athletic, this kid's not into the Parsha sheet Friday night, this kid's not into this, not into that, but there's a place for them. There's a cohesiveness in the family where everybody knows they have a place. And so when we talk about kids who have chosen a different path religiously, they have to be broader than just that factor. There has to be more to that kid, and they have to have a place in the cohesion of the family. And that was finally the factor that, passed in my doctorate, which is coming from somebody who was raised Orthodox and chose a different path and taught me how to think differently than where I was headed.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about the perspective of the parents and how they feel when they get this news and how they relate to the kids. Let's now look at the perspective of the person who's become non-observant and some of the challenges and obstacles that they face in staying connected to their family.
I'm going to answer that one personally, just because for many different periods of my high school years, I would say both as a positive and a negative. I was raised in a classic European home. I'm a first-generation American, which is rare for somebody my age. And the expectation was that you did what you were told, pretty much. You could mouth off a little bit here and there, but then you pulled yourself back into line. And I wasn't sure about my question.
From the perspective of the child who is no longer observing, what is their experience? What's going on for them?
Okay, thank you. Got it. And I remember thinking, even in moments, right, where I wasn't so dissuaded by angering my parents. I wasn't so dissuaded by being the person who was different. But I think the one thing that I kept circling back to was, could I come home and feel like the kid who the parents had to cope with, right? Who didn't bring their kids nachas, right? The kid who they accepted because they had no choice but to accept. That was something that I think was very, very difficult. And even had I chose to go in a different direction, I think I still would have struggled with that, right? Just feeling like my parents had to work to accept who I was. I had to kind of put them through that. I think it's something to think about from the kid's perspective. If you care, what
I think another thing is that very often we assume, because we are using certain measures in our heads to determine whether or not somebody is, I think Rabbi used to speak about someone's thermometer, right? You take a thermometer, it's like, can we measure how firm you are using a thermometer? And if we could, we use certain measures, certain sort of objective markers that we use, and then we make assumptions about where this person is. Could it be, and this, I'm asking this rhetorically because I know the answer, could it be that somebody is actually appearing on the surface, or maybe actually, for the moment, less observant, but actually in some ways really trying to discover themselves and trying to connect with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a meaningful, genuine way? And the answer is sometimes yes. And if we can give people space and not panic and not react to what they're doing, what they're not doing, we may discover that, in fact, they're, as the expression goes, they're on a journey, but they're not as far away as we think, and in fact, they may be closer. I remember years ago, there was a woman in my shul who had been experiencing very, very difficult challenges in life, and I hadn't seen her in shul for some time, and I saw her in the street, and I said, "Is everything okay? I haven't seen you." So she said, "God and I were not on talking terms at the moment. I'm very upset at him, and so therefore I'm not in shul. I'll probably be back at some point, but that's why I'm not in shul." And obviously I was not expecting to hear that, and I didn't quite know how to react. And she immediately said, I'm sorry, Rabbi, that was probably not such a nice thing to say to a rabbi. I'm sorry if I hurt you or offended you or anything like that." And I said, no, I really appreciate it. And I was thinking about it a lot. This was shortly before Rosh Hashanah, and I actually called her afterwards. I said, "I've been actually thinking about it a lot. And I was wondering, if I don't use your name, can I tell that story in shul? I really think, there's a message there." And she goes, "You can do what you want." And I stood up in my shul on Rosh Hashanah that year, and I told everybody about what this woman said. And then I said, "So who do you think is better? If there would be a way to sort of measure this, the woman who believes in God, has a relationship with God, feels connected with Him, but for reasons that are not particularly relevant at the moment, is feeling angry with Him, distant from Him, can't bring herself to fake it, to stand there, and so therefore chooses to take a different path that is just in the moment more genuine, more authentic, so that she can figure out how to make her way back in." Or what I do, and that is I just show up every single day, I grab my phone, and I just stand there and I go through the motions, and perhaps daven from beginning to end, say everything in the book, but it's completely thoughtless and mindless and soulless. Now, I didn't answer the question. I'm not saying that for sure one is necessarily better than the other, because that's a complicated question. But I think most of us would assume, well, you're in shul, you're in. If you're out of shul, you're out. But why? Why should it be that way? And just to talk about from the experience of the person who's going through this challenge, it could very well be that they're just trying to find their place. And if we give them space and time, they will connect very meaningfully.
So I think related to this, when holidays come up, is a natural time that the immediate extended family gets together. And so there's always the risk that when you have observant and non-observant together, there can be a tension there. Is there a set of ground rules or philosophy that families should take with these holidays approach that can make the time they spend together go more smoothly?
You know the story about the monkey? I love stories. So there was a story about a guy who was fired and he was desperately looking for a job and he didn't find it. One day he saw a sign that the zoo is looking for a person. So he came and he was interviewed, and the management said, our monkey died and we're looking for someone to replace the monkey because we don't have money to buy a new monkey. So, but we have a custom, and it looks like regular. So he was desperate. So he started to be a monkey and jumped, and just one day he did a jump next to the cage of the lion. So he was really, threatened. He was very worried about that, and he just breathtaking. The lion came very close to him, and he understood it's going to be the last moment in his life. So he said, "Shema Yisrael Hashem," and the lion said, "Baruch Shem." And then the bear came and said, "Stop screaming, all of us are going to be fired soon." So I think the story says about, one of the visitors came to the manager and said, "This is a kind of a zoo, this is not a zoo, he said, "All the time we are playing as a zoo, just one moment you see." So I want to say, our kids, they have a really Jewish and a great soul. They have to look, even if they have customs and they look different, they act different, but they're great people. And they feel when we consider them as great. And they feel when it comes holidays and everybody is around the table, they feel you don't have to declare or to say something. They feel if you consider them as something else around the table, even as different. And once they feel it, they will also give you back. I mean, they will recognize it at the table, around the table.
Yeah, because I would think it would be almost like an elephant in the room, like if everyone in the family is observant and there's this other person who's there, and it's obvious that they're on a different path. And if you're not talking about it, is it creating this tension around the table, or is there a way to just enjoy the person while they're there and show them that acceptance?
I don't think there needs to be tension again, unless unless it's still a block for us. We need to, most of the work happens in here. We have to really work through our own emotions and where we're struggling with this. And once we get through that, so there really is nothing here. Listen, we're in Fairlawn. If anybody wants to know how to do this, just have a Shabbos meal across the street, or Yom Tov meal across the street. They run a clinic every single Shabbos. I'll never forget, I think it was probably the first year that we were married. I have not had the opportunity to have too many Shabbos Yom Tov meals here in Fairlawn for over 20 years. But in those first few years, I was able to see quite a lot. I remember once there was a member of the extended family, very extended family, who was spending Shabbos with the Yudins, and he was completely inappropriate. He sat there, he was talking way too kiddish, and he wanted to talk about politics and like movies. I don't think whatever was in mind. And Rabbi Yudin was trying to get in the Bartel here, and he just can't get into work. This guy he's monopolizing the conversation, this and that. And at a certain point, probably in between, I don't know, the fish and the soup, this gentleman gets up to use the bathroom. So I was waiting, to hear how Rabbi Yudin was just going to sort of release all of that negative tension and energy and what he was going to say. I'll never forget. He said, "Can you imagine? This is the first time in how many years that this gentleman has heard Kiddush, that he's tasting gefilte fish. His soul must be singing." I mean, that's a lesson. I'll never forget. I saw this with my own eyes. When somebody once at the Shabbos table, the Maya Machronim went around, and went first to the guy who had never been at a Shabbos table before. He didn't know what to do with it. Everybody said, so he took a little drink. So in any other house, that's what would have happened. That's exactly what happened. Everybody would have, that's not what you're supposed to do with it. But not at the Yudins. They just figured out how to just sort of make it work. It doesn't really matter. So the answer is it's absolutely possible. It's absolutely, we just have to love other people, and then everything it just happens. No? Am I oversimplifying it? You make it look very easy.
Well, I think there's also a community piece to this, because I would imagine if you have a child that was raised in a particular community as like a well-known child, it's known throughout the community that they've gone in a different direction. There's going to be something the parents are feeling as they're interacting with other community members who may feel like they want to say, what's going on with so-and-so? What would you counsel parents to do if it's on some level like a community topic that it's a known thing that this child's gone in a different direction?
Don't think what other people think about you. You waste your time. No one really think about you. Everyone has his own echo. And I think we consider people too much. I think it's very important for people to know. Just focus about your kids. And this is very important. People should know. There is a phrase that if someone speaks behind your back, it means that you are before him. You are a step before him. So I know even maybe in my community, many people whispers and speaks, but you don't waste your time. It's about you, it's about your future, it's about your own, and it's really realistic for people because they feel stressful in the community.
And all of you have experienced counseling families who confide in you about some of these situations. So what are some of the things you're saying to families as they're progressing through this and have gotten to the point that the child is not observant?
I think we have to pull out the lens a little bit. We have to leave space for the sadness. And I would even call the grieving process that parents go through. Parents try to impart to their kids all kinds of things, from core values to recreational likes and dislikes. And it's sad and disappointing when our kids don't inculcate what we're trying to impart to them. And the more important the item, the deeper the sadness. And I think to overlook that does to some extent make things a little bit oversimplified. Parents need to have space to feel their sadness, go through a process of grieving and of loss, and that's what allows them to move forward. I think if we try to skip over that process, it will just, it's like playing whack-a-mole. It just will pop up again here and again there. Yet you have to go through that process. And I think, part of that process is hearing parents out. Hearing out what they're processing. I mean, for my family, for so many families, there were like real sacrifices that were made for you to be able to live an observant life, right? Whether you're a child of a survivor, whether you made financial sacrifices, and to see your kids walk away from that, right? Even with an understanding, there can be simultaneous sadness. Those two can coexist. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Parents will blame themselves. What did I do wrong? I mean, think about the messages we hear in shul all the time, right? This is a Torah we have to give to our children and our children's children. That's when we really know they got it, when the grandkids have it, and then the parents are sitting there thinking, and I couldn't even give it over to my kid. Right? So there has to be space given for parents to process that stuff. I think if parents are not processing that stuff, we should encourage them to, because to skip over that stage will be detrimental to their ability to move forward in a way that allows them to simultaneously hold attention, which is I love my Judaism, I love my kid, and those two are not in sync. And how can I live with that tension? Sometimes I can avoid it, and sometimes we simply can't. And I have to learn to live with that tension. And part of that is going through a process that I think we should encourage parents to do if they're not already doing it.
Would you advise parents who are dealing with this? I would think you would think to yourself, well, maybe every 3 months I'll just dangle like a shear that's going on to the person. Be like, oh, you want to come with me next Tuesday? There's a thing. Like, is it worth it for a parent to keep putting out little tidbits, like little breadcrumbs, to try to find a way to keep the person like somewhat connected in a meaningful way to Judaism, or just let it go while this process unfolds?
The number, I think, you can speak more to this, but I think the number one predictor of kids maintaining a healthy relationship with their Judaism, and even potentially coming back, even though that's not an agenda, is the relationship they have with you. That is the number one predictor. And so you gotta know your kid. You gotta know your kid. If you throw it out there and they roll their eyes and say, really, again? And then move on, throw it out there. But if you throw it out there and the kid says, if you don't stop, or they just stuff that thought in, when are you gonna stop? Then don't throw it out there. I think it's so personal, yet you have to know your kid in that regard.
Okay, just show of sorts, and again, I'm going to defer to you, Dr. Cook, on this, but could we not, unless you know the answer, could we not say to our child, or whoever it may be, would it be okay with you if from time to time I send something to you if I thought you'd find it meaningful? Is that something you'd appreciate, or would you rather not? Is that okay?
I couldn't agree with that more. Ask.
I mean, and if, they'll appreciate the question. And if the answer is no, then there's your answer. If the answer is yes, then you won't have to,
I don't think there's anything wrong with saying to your kid, you can change your mind. You may say yes to me today and no tomorrow, and vice versa. This answer doesn't hold, and I'm gonna hold you to this answer forever. You can change your mind. People are evolving. Don't be afraid to come back and change your answer.
It was a couple who came to me for many months ago, and they said we feel not so comfortable inside the community. We are looking for another kind of community. We know you're open-minded rabbi, so we'd like to take advice on you. Which community you suggest? We want to go to the Nation Science community. That's what we said. So we talk about the disadvantages and advantages about each of our communities. And I said, I'm in Brooklyn a lot, I know many communities, and there is many arguments and difficulties and challenges in each community. So I think your own challenges in our community, you are famous with, stay with them, don't change. So I'm saying it because, in the communities I know in America, about the mechitza, which kind of mechitza, transparent mechitza, which woman is going to touch this. It's different. It's not okay. It's not okay, but it's different challenges. So don't replace your challenges, stay with you. And I think also when kids have those kinds of conversation, they're trying to find something new and different. They should know they're going to find absolutely, and maybe you don't know, but the greatest percentage of suicide in the real community comes from the kids who are off the earth. Because they lost the belonging, they never feel as a secular. And then, you mentioned Maslow before. When a kid feels unstable, he has no belonging to anything, so he's desperately taking his life. So I think this conversation, the Shabbos study, is very important to speak with the kids.
And I'm also wondering, are there any organizations, resources, clubs that families can turn to who are dealing with beyond maybe confiding in their rabbi?
I can mention Israel's community, but I think it's much more important for the community to hear what you can offer in America. It's more relevant.
I think in the modern Orthodox community here in the tri-state area, I am not aware, but or maybe I'm just something. I'm not aware of organizations that have been founded for this purpose. I can think of some reasons as to why that is, but rather than lament the fact that Larry Rothbard can't think of any, I would suggest that if we can only sort of absorb some of what we're all trying to work through tonight, then we'll realize that we have hundreds of such organizations. Every shul and every school and every home can function as such an organization. An organization is only needed to address needs that can't be met elsewhere. And there are no problems here that we're discussing tonight that require some new organization to come in and create a space for these people who are forget it. We've already lost. So as we've heard, if there are individuals who are suffering, they need to seek help. They need to seek perhaps counseling. If there are individuals who are confused as to what to do, what not to do, so there are places that they can go. But this notion, again, I'm not giving you a hard time for asking the question. I think the question is a good one. But now that I can't think of it, why not? I'm not sure why not, but the answers are right here. We can within our own institutions. I hope that every shul functions in a way that when a kid comes back, if they're coming back from wherever, whether they've been gone for a couple of years or for 10 years or longer, and sometimes you don't even know who this person is, but all the indicators are there that it's been a long time since he or she has been in shul. So how do we respond? How do we react to such an individual? We don't want to make them feel like a nebuch. Oh, can I give you a sibur? As if this person may absolutely know exactly, what's going on in here, who's doing what's what. But to just go ahead and just let people know that we love them. Do rabbis? I think I know the answer to this question. Do rabbis go out of their way to give a special handshake and in certain cases a hug to a young man who hasn't been in shul for a long time? You should, right? I would think so. But not as a gesture of never, but just so the organizations exist. We just need to all do our jobs the way we should be.
I think from this weekly parsha, we know exactly what we have to do. It's about the Ron, Tfilah, and Milchama. The Ron, it's a gift. Just treat your child as a gift. And don't forget to pray for God to God all the time. Prayers is a very important rule. It relieves our soul, and we believe in davening. And also fight for Israel. Fight for Israel, for his well-being. I think those three things could really help this young generation.
I also want to ask all three of you, how much of what we're talking about tonight applies in a reverse situation where the entire family is secular and one family member has chosen to become observant?
Or can we
Or
tweak it a little bit?
more than what the
More
family
modern and more observant. I think there are tremendous parallels. I don't want to use a strong word, like a feeling of betrayal, of disappointment, that the way we prepare food is no longer acceptable. The things we do Shabbat afternoon is no longer acceptable. you'll come with us in some places, you won't come with us in other places. The underlying tensions, I think, are very similar. I don't think it's more appealing necessarily, a child who's become more observant than a child who's become less observant. I think those underlying tensions are very much the same. Living in the modern Orthodox world, that's what I deal with most. But in my professional capacity, I work with the Haredi population. And so I deal with the opposite issue. I think just to echo what Rafa said a minute ago, which is, I think it's a point of pride for the modern Orthodox community that for the most part, our young adults don't feel that they can't come back to their shul rabbi, their shul rebbetzin, and talk about a divergent path. I think that's something we can pride ourselves on. We've created that safe space for them to come back to, which again, it's not for me to, God forbid, unilaterally put the Haredi community in one bunch. The population with whom I work do not have that safety to the same extent at all. It's very difficult.
Yeah, one of the most common things that
I just wanted to mention that I published in the blog of in my blog, The Times of Israel, about my relationship with my daughter. So it became viral, and I got messages from Christians. They said, secretly, I will not say to no one, can you give me advice? My kids also of the dark. I understood it's a universal issue, but one of the parents who lives in New York, they are completely secular family, and one of the kids become Chabad. And she cried, she said, what should I do with them? And it's going to destroy my life. She was so, and I said, let me meet him. We met in a restaurant in Israel. He's studying Torah Menachem in Chabad. And what I said for this guy, for the young guy, you know, in the beginning, when you become Bar Tshuva, you think you figure out how the world, you know, you're euphoria, you feel you're the best, but with the time, it's become not as in the beginning. So I told them about balances, and you should understand that respect parents is one of our greatest values in the Jewish tradition. And if you do something that you reject or not mechabed, not respect the parents, you should know it's gonna maybe embrace one value but reject another value. It's about kibbud orim. And then also I show him many stories about people in the beginning it was crazy, and then they lost completely connection with God. So, and you know, the mother, she told me, it's completely changed his attitude. So it's also something that we can help for young people, just to balance them.
It's interesting, this question I was asking, I've been interviewing all these people on the podcast who are usually the only person in the family who's become religious. And I invariably hear them say that the parents' reaction is that this choice is an indictment on how they were raised. And the parents are saying, well, what did I do wrong that you're doing this? And what we often talk about is the observant person is saying, actually, I'm just exploring the same religion you raised me on a deeper level. I'm not rejecting anything. In fact, I'm more into what you raised me on, but it still doesn't make it any easier for the parents to accept the choice. Nancy, I did my list, so you don't open the floor.
I just want to say something before the end, that I was in Ethiopia for 3-4 years ago before the coronavirus, and there is a legend, Ethiopian legend. And I think it's very important also for our kids. So the woman, she told us the following story. It's a legend story, that the lion wanted very much to be married with the daughter of the king. And the lion is very impressive, yeah, he's the king of the animals. So the king said, okay, it's a good idea, but you know your nails, it's a little bit dangerous. So the lion ran for 2 days and he come back with no nails. So he said, now can I get married with the daughter? So the king said, it's much better, but your earth, it's a little bit threatened. So he went very fast to make the haircut, come back with no hair. He said, he said, no, it's much better, but your tooth is terrible. And in a very weak moment, you can fight the prince. And this is something that he said, give me more 2 days. And he come back with no tooth. And he said, now I can get married with a daughter. and we said, this is a line, you look like a broken cat, how can I give you to my leather? So, and the message is, if you compromise your values, other people will not respect you. And I think very important for our kids, they should know we have values and strong values, we're not compromising them. It gives them very much confidence and borders. They need it desperately.
Thank you. I think this was terrific. We have time for one or two questions. Does anybody?
I wanted to talk a little bit more about school, the schools. I think a lot of people feel like we were taught certain things in school that maybe give us a lot of religious guilt or religious insecurity. So it doesn't actually come from the home, but it comes from messages from teachers. And how can we teach teachers to change their dialect a little bit and instill this sort of love and non-judgmentalism about others as we grow up in this world? You know, these are things that we're learning when we're like 10, so it stays with us.
The best way to replace them.
That's fine. I was gonna start by saying you just hijacked everybody for another hour, but we just did it in 5 seconds. I think part of the issue is that traditionally, I don't know if we should say traditionally, contemporary as well, we're not sending enough of our own into our own schools, right? Every profession other than teaching for our own. And so we're bringing teachers from other communities to espouse our values, but they're not our own kids, and they aren't growing up in our system, and they aren't understanding the complexity of our system. And I think that's a real weakness in our school system. We have to be willing to encourage our best and our brightest to, as having been a teacher for 20 years, make the sacrifice, right? I got out before I burned out, so I know what it's like, but it's a sacrifice to serve in the role of Jewish education. We need to encourage our kids who have that, it's a good way to say it, the hush. You know, they it's like a word that gets lost in translation. But they understand the sensitivity and the nuance. I can't do it in one, I'll do it in 2. They understand the sensitivity and the nuance and have a tremendous knowledge base. It's a lot to ask. It's a lot to ask, but that's what our kids deserve. And I think that will impact tremendously.
I do think that there have been, you know, some of this is generational. I'm not gonna ask you when you were in school. It's not my business. But I remember when I was in school and the messages I got from many of my teachers, I would say that almost all of them, I have tremendous, I'm very grateful. I'm very appreciative. My yeshiva experience was a positive one, but I would never try to impart the messages that they shared with me quite in the way that they did, for a whole variety of reasons. We'll just leave it at that. But I really, really do believe, despite the fact that, yes, very often we are imported teachers from other communities, and they don't necessarily share all the values that we're discussing tonight. The truth of the matter is, I really, really do believe this could be a good convention, and I don't think you would have heard anything differently tonight. I think that there are winds of change that are happening all over. I hope that everything for tonight was refreshing and was sort of helpful and maybe clarifying in some ways, but I would be surprised if anybody heard anything tonight that seemed truly radical. I can't believe that an Orthodox rabbi said such a thing. And I think a lot has changed over the last 20, 30 years. It's not that we're now so much, all of a sudden we're so enlightened, and 20, 30 years ago they didn't know what they were talking about. It's just, there has been a response and reaction to trends in the community that either weren't there or were not being recognized and were not being addressed. And I think that children in school today are getting a lot more of this than we did. I really, really, really do think so.
We're gonna do 2 quick questions. First of all, does anybody get any idea what percentage of people coming from Orthodox background leave? And the second question I have is, might you suggest that parents of OTDs simply forgive themselves? Because the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of inward guilt, anger and guilt towards the people themselves. And I think the only healthy solution is self-forgiveness?
I can say just for the first question, in Israel, 10% from the graduates, we have 22,000 boys and girls graduate each year, and 10% of them just dropping out from the community. And officially, we don't know how many stays inside the community, but they have no connection with God. Because in the national science community, there is almost 40% dropping out. It's a very huge issue in Israel. It bothers the national science community very much. Mainly it happens in the army. And it's very sad, my end. Thank you.
I think when it comes to self-forgiveness, I would tweak that language and talk about self-compassion. Because with self-forgiveness, there's already an implicit thought that I did something wrong. Self-compassion is about, this is my life, right? We don't choose a lot of pieces in our life. This is what I've been given. This is what I have to embrace. This is what I have to address. This is my life. And that takes a lot of self-compassion, which leaves a lot of room for a lot of emotions. But at the end of the day, it's self-compassion as opposed to forgiveness, which I think is a very important concept to develop.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm speechless, which is difficult, but unusual. Thank you. We are putting together our plans for 2023. We welcome any and all ideas. Please send them by email. It's an easy address to remember. Inspired by Alona@outlook.com. Or if you want to send it to me, it's Larry@inspiredbyalona.com. Thank you, Jeff, for a terrific job. Thank you, Rabbi Rogowitz. Thank you, Dr. Pupko. Thank you, Rabbi Mamet. That's about it. Please let us know. I think we're going to daven Mariv. Where? In the shul, right? Here.